All right, so seeing as it's a little past 7 now, I think we can go ahead and get started. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Bryce Goodwin, and I am the editor-in-chief at Conduct Detrimental, and I'm one of the execs on the law student board, along with 𝗦𝗫𝗀𝗃𝗀 and Evan Lotato. And this is our second symposium of this year as a law student board. This is our fall symposium, and we are incredibly excited to share this with you guys. Our moderators, CJ and Shelby, have spent a lot of time putting this together, getting our panelists together. We have a wonderful group of panelists tonight. We're going to share some amazing insight with everyone, and it's going to be a great learning experience, just like our summer one was. I'll let Mike talk about the symposium in more detail in a bit, but I just wanted to come on before we started and just briefly talk about some of the things we've got going on at Conduct. As you guys know, we're doing symposiums, and we've just finished, or the submission deadline just passed for our second annual writing competition. If you are unaware of that or didn't realize that we had a writing competition, we do one each year, basically on a different sports law topic, to see the different scholarship that all of you guys who are interested in sports law can bring. And it's a great way just to get a written work product in sports law out there, and just connect with conduct detrimental in a different way. But as always, if you're looking to get involved with us at Conduct, we are willing and wanting anyone and everyone that wants to come contribute in sports law and help us accomplish our mission. And so if you've got any questions about how to get more involved with Conduct, whether that means writing articles, whether that means potentially helping Mike with all the work with the podcast that he does, working with Ethan Zucker, who's our other executive who's not on at the minute, but he'll be joining later with breaking news and the crew that we have with Breaking News Now. There are so many ways that you can get plugged in and get involved. So if you have any questions about that, I'm going to put our Gmail in the chat for you guys to take down, so that you can reach out to us and we can get that process going. But before I kick it off to Mike, really quick, just for purposes of connection, what we love to do with these symposiums is, if you're in law school, we love for you some part of your name to include where you go to law school currently, or if you're out of law school and you're an attorney, basically we'd love to know who your employer is currently. That way, for everyone that's part of the symposium, we kind of have a better idea of who everyone is, where everyone's from, and it's just a great way to kick off more connections and get more plugged in the sports law community. So if you have any questions on how that looks like, Mike's is a great example that he's got right now. So if you don't mind doing that, that would be amazing. Again, I'll put our Gmail into the chat so that you guys can reach out if you have any questions about getting involved with Conduct. And with that, I'm going to kick it off to Mike, who's going to tell us a little bit more introductory wise about the symposium.
Yeah, thanks, Bryce. Appreciate it. Hey, everyone, and welcome to our second Conduct Detrimental Sports Law Symposium. Like Bryce said, we had one in the summer, and if you joined us for that, thank you again for joining and welcome back. And if this is your first one, thank you and welcome to our fall symposium. We've been super excited to start putting these together, summer and fall thus far, and appreciate you all joining out. So the idea of these is that we wanted to provide, like Bryce said, a great opportunity to connect with and learn from industry experts and practicing attorneys in our field. So our second symposium will feature insightful panels on sports law as a human rights tool, which will be led by Shelby Stevens, a conduct law student board member at 𝗧 at Gonzaga Law, and as well as a second panel, relationships in sports, which will be led by CJ Olson, who is also a conduct law student board member and a 𝗧 at Miami. So we're super excited and thrilled to have an amazing lineup of the speakers and look forward to another great symposium. So with that, I will throw it over to Shelby for the first panel.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Bryce and Mike, for such a great introduction. And thank you so much, everyone, for coming out this evening. So as Mike was saying, my name is Shelby Stevens. I am a 𝗧 at Gonzaga Law School, go Zags, and I'm glad to see some Gonzaga representation here tonight. And I'm excited to host this panel on sports as a human rights tool, because I think sports and human rights go hand in hand, and I think both are essential to fostering a sports culture that is ethical, inclusive, and respects the dignity and rights of all participants. So without further ado, I would like to introduce my speakers this evening. So our first speaker this evening is Dr. 𝗦𝗫𝗀𝗃𝗍, and Dr. 𝗦𝗫𝗃𝗍 is an expert in sports law, and he has a special focus on the Olympic Games, sports and human rights, and sports governance. His research examines issues related to sports law, particularly in the areas of human rights and integrity. His PhD work examined violations of international human rights, of hosts of the Olympic Games, and the role of the IOC in addressing those abuses. He teaches tort law, sports law, and sports and human rights at Thompson Rivers University in Canada, and also is the director of the Oregon Sports Law Summer Institute in Eugene, Oregon. We next have Ashlyn Hare, who is an associate attorney at Hutchinson Black & Cook in Boulder, Colorado, and her law practice focuses on sports law and civil rights litigation. In her sports work, Ashlyn represents Olympic and Paralympic athletes in team selection disputes, safe sport complaints, and doping cases, as well as college and high school athletes in Title IX athletics and abuse cases. Ashlyn also works on complex litigation across a variety of subject areas, including sexual assault, victim representation, constitutional rights violations, and commercial breach of contract disputes, as well as personal injury. And then last but certainly not least, we have Kate Porter, who is general counsel at 𝗦𝗃𝗃𝗍, which is the National Women's Soccer League team in the San Francisco Bay Area. At 𝗦𝗃𝗃𝗍, Kate is responsible for providing legal guidance on all areas of the club's business, including player relations, league compliance, sponsorship, ticketing, and the club's real estate development projects. And prior to joining 𝗦𝗃𝗃𝗍, Kate was a partner and head of the sports practice at Baylor Wood in Dallas, Texas. And there she represented international sports organizations, soccer officials, and professional sports teams and leagues in investigations and disputes before the Court of Arbitration for Sport and in internal proceedings before FIFA. And she also has routinely advised sports organizations on their contractual rights and obligations and governance-related matters. So thank you so much all for coming and speaking with us today. So I'm going to go ahead and start with some of my questions to address how we can use sports as a human rights tool. So for all of you, the first question I have is, can you all explain how you would define the role of sports in advancing human rights? And can you provide examples where sports have successfully contributed to social change? So we can go ahead and start with Dr. 𝗦𝗫𝗀𝗃𝗍𝗁. We'll go from there.
Sorry, I was waiting for either Kate or Ashlyn to jump in because I thought they might be more insightful. I'll take the academic approach, though, and I'll break it down into, I think sport can do two things when we talk about advancing human rights. I think the first thing it can do is it can bring awareness to particular human rights issues in a way that's really concrete, in a way that really resonates with people. I think a lot of people see human rights as something that's over there. It happens to someone else. It's some big thing we have to do. But I think that, athletes being so well known, they can really bring attention to issues that seem abstract. I'm thinking, the example that comes to mind is 𝗦𝗫𝗃𝗃𝗍, the long distance runner marathoner in the UK, right? He wins the Olympic gold medal in 2012, national hero, gets knighted, the whole thing. And then it comes down 2012, he mentions that he's a victim of child trafficking and he was brought into the UK to work as a domestic servant. And that really brought attention to human trafficking, I think, in a way that is tangible and is real. Here's someone who's been very successful, but they had to go through this incredible violation of their human rights. The other thing I think sport can do is that it highlights the values that it shares with human rights. That there's, like you said, Shelby, they really go hand in hand. The Olympic Charter sets out fundamental principles of Olympism, what the Olympics does, and talks about the educational value of good examples, social responsibility, but also says crystal clear, the respect for internationally recognized human rights. The IOC says this is what being an Olympian is about. And we can talk about other values like fairness or solidarity and respect for rules. I think, you have the concrete examples that people can go, oh, that's an issue. But then you have the underlying values that are really the same across both.
Yeah, I mean, I'll jump in and kind of echo that. I think the biggest thing that sports offers in human rights is a platform. Sports are, at the forefront of culture globally. Whether or not, that's that's the right view. I mean, but it's everyone, or not everyone, but sports are immensely popular. And so I think when athletes and sports organizations use the platform that they have, they can really create an effect, lasting and important change. And so, sports in general promote things like inclusivity and equality and resilience. And so there's already a platform where those important fundamentals are at the forefront. And then, when athletes and sports organizations then use that platform, I think there are some really important there are instances of really important change. Some examples we can throw out, the women's national team, the fight for equal pay. That was certainly a very important movement. It highlighted the inequity of pay between men and women, not only in sport, but also in other industries. And it was a starting point for a national discussion and perhaps international discussion. The Colin Kaepernick kneeling and the start of the Black Lives Matter. I think they're not entirely the same, but Colin Kaepernick kneeling for the national anthem was the start of just bringing attention to issues of racial injustice that was then amplified by the NBA players and the Black Lives Matter movement. So there are a number of instances where players have kind of used the attention and the platform that they have and the space that they hold in the public eye to draw attention to global issues. And I think that it has led to important dialogue and in some cases, real change.
Yeah, I mean, you both kind of hit the nail on the head there and covered most of what I was going to talk about. So I'll try and switch things up a little bit. I really feel like sports are a microcosm of our society, and they're really reflective of the issues that are going on for everyday people. And so in that way, they're not only a way to drive forward change, but they can also be reflective of major problems that are also happening in our society. So Kate is obviously more than aware of, for example, the NWSL and all of the sexual abuse that was going on and being hidden by major executives in that league and on those teams. And another really great example of how sports can reflect, they're a marker of where we are in time, and that can be bad things as well. The Caster Semenya dispute with the IAAF, now known as World Athletics, over intersex inclusion in sports and also privacy rights around issues like that, and how that has kind of spiraled in the US to really trans exclusion policies in Olympic sports and the NCAA and in youth leagues. That was very evident with Lia Thomas and her situation throughout the past several years. So they're a great way of driving change. They're also a really good marker to see where we're at and where we need to improve.
Awesome. Thank you all so much for your insight there. So the next question that I have is going to talk a little bit more on the legal side of things. So what legal frameworks do you all find have been most effective for advocating for human rights in sports, and how can these be expanded?
Yeah, I mean, I think the there's the International Human Rights Conventions, various the UN, Universal, Declaration of Human Rights. There's the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights. I think one of the most effective, and it's just kind of the way that the procedural posture is, convention is the European Convention on Human Rights. And this is because when international athletes have disputes, they tend to go before the Court of Arbitration for Sport in Switzerland, regardless of if the athlete is European or Swiss. You have the right to appeal certain decisions to the Court of Arbitration for Sport, and then that arbitral tribunal will issue a decision. You can try to set aside that award before the Swiss Federal Tribunal, and once you do so, and that decision, assuming it's denied, you have an appellate right, no matter if you're European or not, but you have an appellate right it's not an appellate right, but you have a right to bring a claim before the European Court of Human Rights. And so the European Convention on Human Rights plays a really important role because athletes have now a platform and a mechanism to bring human rights complaints to a adjudicatory body and to have those complaints heard. So one of the, I think the most important cases recently, and Ashlyn touched on it, was the 𝗥𝗲𝗄𝗵𝘁𝘀 case. 𝗥𝗲𝗄𝗵𝘁𝘀 is a woman. She's South African. She's a 800-meter middle distance runner, and was, a fantastic athlete, was competing in the women's category and just beating everyone handedly. And some of her competitors started complaining that she was not a biological female. And so they pressured sports organizations to have her submit to genetic testing. And it came out that she is intersex. So she was born with external female genitalia, apparently, allegedly. I mean, it's been reported, but internal testes. And so she was raised as a woman, had her entire life, up until she was 19, 20 years old, thought she was a woman. And the public scrutiny challenged the very, I think, core essence of, what someone is your gender is one of the first things that you realize about yourself and you understand about yourself. And so that very essence and core principle of who she was challenged publicly. And then the results of those tests were leaked. World Athletics later passed regulations that prevented her from competing in the female category without submitting to or without taking testosterone suppressants and adapting other measures to more evenly, I guess, level the competition given her genetic advantages. And so she challenged these regulations. She was was ultimately unsuccessful. And there were various steps in this process, but, ultimately she was unsuccessful before the Court of Arbitration for Sport, who found that the regulations were per se discriminatory, but, that there is a logical and rational basis for the sports organization to create these regulations that would prevent her from competing without taking certain testosterone suppressants and other medication. And so she took that up to the European Court of Human Rights. And so she was able to get recourse and ultimately received a favorable decision, at least in the first instance, from the European Court of Human Rights. So, I mean, I think that's a very long-winded explanation to say that, this convention plays an important role because of the ability of athletes to access and to adjudicate claims before the European Court of Human Rights under the European Convention on Human Rights. But I think there's also national laws and sport-specific policies that come into play. The USOPC's role in creating safeguarding principles and the U.S. Center for Safe Sport has been extremely important in protecting athletes from sexual abuse, minor athletes and also female athletes, and providing a mechanism for individuals to file complaints and to seek recourse for alleged abuse. So, I mean, I think there's a lot of really helpful, legislation and policies out there. There's always room for improvement, and I'm not sure that sports organizations have done, completely done enough. But certainly there are ways out there for human rights abuses to be addressed. So that was very long-winded, and I apologize.
Yeah, I can hop in. I can see Ryan waiting for somebody else to take over. A lot of my work focuses on the interscholastic and intercollegiate levels with Title IX litigation. And so that has been a really important route to secure rights for female athletes, both on the athletic side of Title IX and ensuring that they're receiving adequate opportunities, that they're able to compete on teams and that those teams are meeting the needs of athletes and that they're getting equal treatment in terms of things like facilities, uniforms, scholarships, all of that. Title IX is also extremely beneficial in addressing abuse in interscholastic and intercollegiate athletics. We have a number of cases that we've brought that involve female athletes who have been sexually assaulted by either another athlete on campus or just another student or sometimes even a coach. And that has been a very important tool in obviously not completely rectifying what has happened to them, but allowing them some recourse. Title IX has been, I think, increasingly outdated. And on the sports side in particular, it's slowly becoming difficult to keep up with the pace and the growth of football. And so those are difficult cases to bring. And there was a recent Supreme Court decision in 2022 called Cummings v. Premier Rehab Center that has basically all but eviscerated a cause of action under Title IX for sexual abuse against a university. It essentially says that you can't recover damages for emotional distress, which when you have been sexually assaulted is basically the only type of damages that you can get. So those are important tools, but they're becoming more and more unwieldy as case law progresses. Like Kate said, we also have a lot of safe sport cases, and safe sport, I think, has been a huge development across the board. And it has its flaws and it needs improvements, but having it as a venue is like it's hard to describe how impactful it is and how necessary it is. So even with its flaws, I'm still very pro safe sport. I think one of the issues that we've had in our practice is how do we address kind of the gap between Title IX and safe sport as it pertains to college sports. I think college sports are lacking a way to deal with things like emotional or physical abuse. And so that has been something that we frequently encounter, but haven't really quite found a way to deal with. And yeah, the last thing that I'll say in terms of a very powerful tool for athletes to use in advancing human rights is collective bargaining, which has obviously been instrumental in professional leagues and I think would go a long ways in college sports, but obviously there's a lot of hurdles to overcome there. But yeah, we've seen a lot of the women's professional leagues like the WNBA and the NWSL bargaining in some really significant protections that it's hard to get otherwise.
Yeah, I agree with everything that Kate and Ashlyn have said, and I just want to add a couple of things. Because I think Ashlyn's absolutely correct when she says, not only Title IX, but I think a lot of the human rights, frameworks just that we have are kind of outdated. When we think of human rights, this was 1947 Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and it was here's what the states have to do. And we're still kind of stuck in that framework, and it can't deal with global industry so well. We have the UN guiding principles on human rights, but they're not binding. We've had decisions such as the Martin decision from 1984, where the Ninth Circuit said, yeah, there might be discrimination. And that was a case where women were not allowed to run the 5,000 and 10,000 meter races at the Olympics, but men were. And the Ninth Circuit said, look, we have a global event here. We can't apply California law to a global event. That doesn't seem right. In Canada in 2010, we had the Sagan decision where the BC Court of Appeal, in that case, involved women's ski jumpers. Men were allowed to ski jump in the Olympics, women were not. They brought a complaint under Canada's Charter of Rights and Freedoms. BC Court of Appeal says, this decision's made by a body in Switzerland. We can't do anything about it. And so Kate's right to bring up the European Convention on Human Rights. This seems really promising. But there is the risk that that if the CAS gets its house in order and talks about human rights even a little bit, then the European courts may go, okay, that's good enough. We're not going to interfere, because that's the issue here, right? Is we have this state-centered approach to human rights. Here are state obligations. Here's what states have to do. And depending on the state, they may have different approaches that affect athletes if you're in the US versus if you're in Afghanistan. And I think we need to move to a slightly different approach. We need to, whether we think about, an affected person approach, right? Taking a look, not at obligations of, what should the leagues do, but how do we protect people? What do people need, right? And that's a bit of a different thing. I think you see that coming out in collective bargaining, where when players can have that, the players can say, here's what we need, here's what would benefit us. But right now, it's still very top down. It's a sport organization saying, here's your policy, or it's people saying, here's what the policy should be. And the problem with policy is you can have the nicest policy in the world, but if it's not enforced, it doesn't mean a darn thing. And I think that is going to be a lot of the trick going forward, is this concern of, well, we got this great policy, but we have nothing to back it up.
Awesome. Thank you for answering that question. And a lot of you sort of alluded to this in your responses, but I just wanted to expand on that a little bit and sort of address how can sports organizations effectively incorporate human rights standards into their policies and practices. I know we just talked about safe sport and we talked about the UN Declaration, but how do you see sports organizations like making these decisions and implementing them in practice?
My answer is going to be quick. It comes down to governance, which I'm sure it's more complicated than that, but I think that's the big underlying theme. That organizations, they have to have the appropriate structures in place. They can have the policy, but do they have structures for monitoring and enforcement? Are there rewards for compliance, or are there negative sanctions for noncompliance? Right? Did anything happen to the NWSL teams who kept on funneling the coaches around and signing the non-disclosure agreements? Doesn't seem like it. Is there a person or an office where the buck stops? That was a big problem with the NWSL. USA Soccer said it's not really our problem. NWSL seemed to say it's not really our problem. Teams seem to say it's not really our problem. And in the case of the NWSL and USA Soccer, they worked in the same office. They were physically together, and they go, well, it's someone else's problem. It's not ours. And with Safe Sport, well, it's maybe Safe Sport's problem. And this happened again, sorry to bring in the Canadian content, but this is an issue last year in Canada where hockey players abused, engaged in sexual abuse. And the entire board of Hockey Canada did nothing for years. They didn't investigate. The police said nothing to see here. Sport Canada said nothing to see here. And then it came out in the news and everyone went, what happened? And everyone went, well, it's not our problem. It had nothing to do with us. And it was a complete governance failure. And so, answering those questions is who's ultimately responsible to oversee any of this? I think if you don't get that right, I think any policy you have or any collaboration you have or anything else you do is not going to be particularly useful.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's spot on. The particularly the enforcement part. If you don't have, you can have all the great policies, but if you don't have the ability to enforce, it renders the policy meaningless. I think that's some of the criticisms with safe sport is just, there seems to be a backlog and a just inability to process the number of cases as quickly as probably should be processed. And I think it's probably a testament to how pervasive the problem was before safe sport existed. And so, safe sport is a very good step in the right direction. But the amount of resources necessary to really fully get to the bottom of this is tough. Same thing happened with, the FIFA ethics process. The first iteration of the revamped FIFA Code of Ethics and the FIFA Ethics Committee, were very aggressive prosecutors and investigators. And then you saw kind of a step back, and the caseload and the ability of FIFA to efficiently, investigate breaches of its code of ethics has diminished, I think, greatly. And so you're seeing a far fewer number of cases. Do I think that, there are no longer ethics issues in the global sport? No, I mean, global soccer, I don't. I think that there's probably the same or maybe more. It's just that the resources aren't there to tackle these cases anymore. And certainly the amount of FIFA's legal bills in those first few years probably was also a deterrent. But I think also just the core of incorporating human rights standards is also listening to your stakeholders, the athletes, the sports teams and organizations, and really having a free and open dialogue to understand, what issues are important that aren't being adequately addressed, and then take that back and figure out how to revise policies and incorporate them in a way that makes meaningful changes. And I think, I won't talk about the NWSL before I worked in the league, but I will talk about the current NWSL, which has just passed a new collective bargaining agreement, agreed to a new collective bargaining agreement that for the first time in any professional sports league in the United States has complete free agency. So we no longer have a draft. We no longer have restricted free agency. And there were a number of other steps taken to I guess, promote the sport and make it more equitable for the players. And that was a result of the league sitting down and listening to the players and the Players Association and understanding what was important to them and making meaningful change. And the league in return got labor stability for another 5 years, 6 years. So I mean, there was a trade-off, but I think it boils down to the league listening to what was important. And so, where sports organizations are sitting down and listening to their stakeholders, I think that's when you make really, truly meaningful changes.
Yeah, I'll echo Kate on that point. I think one of the things that sports leagues could improve on is taking more of a human first rather than athlete first approach. Just seeing the whole person for who they are beyond just who they are as an athlete, I think goes a long way towards addressing those issues in practice. But yeah, in my practice, I would definitely agree on the enforcement side of things, that is really where everything is lacking. We see with all these different national governing bodies, they have various protections against discrimination and they have whistleblower protection policies, but there is a definite lack of trust between the athletes and the governing bodies that when they come forward with a concern that it is actually going to be handled correctly and dealt with effectively. And also with regard to those whistleblower protection policies, and when an athlete comes forward with a major concern, and let's say it has to deal with their coach that they're working with and dealing with every day, and the national governing body comes forward and they say, we're going to do an investigation and anything that you say could be reported to your abuser, there's due process concerns for whoever is being accused of something, of course, but for the athletes to actually put any faith in that governing body is really, really difficult. And it's something that comes up repeatedly in every investigation that we deal with is an athlete or a witness request anonymity, and then the national governing body or Safe Sport or the school, whoever it is, refuses to continue the investigation because they say that they don't have any evidence that they can substantiate because everybody wants to be anonymous. And I think that cycle is something that it reflects the lack of trust between athletes and their organizations, but also a need for more enforceable and definite protections other than this just like vague whistleblower protection policy that's hanging out in the background, but not really effective in practice. I think you're muted, Shelby.
Sorry about that. Can everyone hear me now? Perfect. So thank you all for answering that one. So sort of just piggybacking off the last question and addressing how we can incorporate human rights standards into policies and practices, I just want to talk a little bit about the athlete side. So what challenges do athletes face when they speak out against human rights issues? And do you see how any positive ways that these can be addressed to help alleviate the challenges that they face when they speak out?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think the biggest thing is the backlash that athletes face when speaking out. So take the Colin Kaepernick example example. He effectively lost his job. He lost his entire career because he took a stand or I guess he did the opposite. He did not take a stand. He took a knee to create and to establish a dialogue about abuses of human rights abuses. And so, athletes, there's a real risk that athletes can risk their jobs, they can risk their careers for speaking out. They can put themselves in danger as well. I mean, depending on what they're talking about and where they're speaking and where they're bringing these issues to light. I think at times there are real risks to player safety as well. And then, there's also financial concerns. So not only your playing contract, but your sponsorship and endorsement deals. Brands, may align with the athlete's positions, or they may not. And there are real financial repercussions to speaking out. And so, I think there's a number of things that sports organizations can do to protect athletes and provide them with an opportunity to become an advocate for human rights safely and efficiently. And so some of these things could be, Ashlyn touched on whistleblower protections. But maybe there are protections, similar protections for athletes to allow them to use their platform to speak out and protect their job stability and prevent their teams and their clubs from retaliating if they're speaking out against broader human rights issues, not necessarily whistleblowers exactly, but if they're speaking on issues affecting certain communities in the country. The Colin Kaepernick example. If the NBA or the NFL had a policy that would protect his right to speech, maybe that would be helpful. It's hard to do because I think the 49ers had a different argument for why he's no longer their quarterback. They pinned it on performance, but I think that was thinly veiled. And creating athlete support networks, so platforms where athletes can advocate collectively, so that there's less of an attention on a singular athlete and therefore less risk to an athlete. If a group of athletes speaks out, it's far less risky than an individual.
And I mean, there's also restrictions that come from the top in sport, right? The International Olympic Committee has the Olympic Charter and has Rule 50. And Rule 50 sub 2 says there shall be no kind of political, racial, or political religious demonstration or racial propaganda at Olympic sites. And it used to be fairly absolute. You couldn't do a thing if you had a tattoo. If there was an athlete, I remember they had rainbow colored nails and got at least a finger wagging, if not more. And there's questions around, what do you mean by propaganda? About 10 years ago, there was even a fight between England and FIFA over England wearing the poppy, which is a symbol for Remembrance Day in England and the UK around Remembrance Day. And FIFA said, well, that's propaganda. Well, is playing the national anthem before an event propaganda? Is a military flyover propaganda? Is, pulling out an anti-war shirt propaganda? And so we're not sure what exactly this contour looks like, and so athletes are worried about that. Now the USOPC has stepped in, like Kate said, to tell athletes, hey, you can speak. We pretty much got your back on this. How well that's worked out in practice, ask the athletes, but at least they've made that statement. But yeah, I mean, Colin Kaepernick's a good one, again, to bring more Canadian content into this. April Hutchinson is a power lifter from Canada, and she spoke out against the inclusion of trans athletes and was suspended by the Canadian Powerlifting Union over that. Now, I'm not here to defend her views. I know that's a very hot button topic, but athletes have been suspended and have been booted off a national team for their speech. This has happened. That's an example of it. So yeah, whether building in sort of clauses protecting them from doing so or not, depending on your take on free speech. Some people are more absolutist on free speech, and some people are less absolutist on free speech as well. So even when we talk about free speech, if we have an athlete that comes out and says, I support genocide, we would probably go, well, we're not quite thrilled about that message. So how do we frame that? How do we structure even that right to speech?
Yeah, when I heard this question, I was immediately thinking about the financial repercussions that Kate talked about. Um, I come from a track and field background. I ran track at the University of Oregon. I have a lot of friends and teammates who compete professionally now. And that is a sport, along with a lot of other Olympic sports, that all of the money that they make comes directly from their sponsors, and they get almost nothing from their leagues or their national governing bodies. And those sponsors have a lot of discretion, and sports where you're not making a lot of money, like track and field, have a really heavy imbalance between that sponsor and the contract that they're going to offer you and the athlete and their representation. And so one of the things that can be really important in building in some more protections for the athlete is having an agent or an attorney representing you in your contract negotiations. And if that is something that is important to the athlete, it's something that they can try to bargain into it. You might have a big powerhouse like Nike that's not going to let that happen. But at least you can say that you've tried. I've also seen increasingly more and more sponsors and companies popping up that have more of a focus on human rights or just generally like more progressive views, and they want to align with athletes that feel similarly and also want to advertise themselves and market themselves as more than just an athlete, but also as use their platform for the things that they care about, which I think is extremely important when we think about the multifaceted aspects of athletes in their lives. They're not just an athlete, but they also are Black or gay or trans or non-binary, and that's something that they can't just like leave at the gate. And that backlash is something that is increasingly becoming more and more difficult. And to the extent that you can protect the athlete around their financial issues it's extremely important. Yeah.
Again, I muted again. Sorry about that. So just one final question before I open the floor to our participants for questions. How can law students and young attorneys help to spread awareness about human rights in sports?
So I think when we talk about human rights in sports, we've talked about some of the issues here that are these, global issues. It's the Olympics, it's the NFL, it's the NWSL, and I think those are important places to do work and important issues to address. But I think a lot of work needs to be done at the grassroots level. You can do a lot of good, sort of from that bottom up, like Ashlyn saying, listening to the athletes and Kay mentioned similar that you can be, and you might go, well, man, there's no money in doing this work, but you can be a labor lawyer for 4 days a week, and you can help people navigate employment contracts. You can help them navigate collective bargaining agreements and those issue or sponsorship agreements as part of what you do. Or you can be a corporate governance lawyer, and then you can advise your local baseball league on how to have a more inclusive policy, or how to have training for coaches, or those sorts of things. So you can do a lot of those issues at the lower levels of sport and have that hopefully start to percolate up. Because like at the end of the day, I don't think there's a government agency coming in to rescue people. There's not going to be some grand regulator of sport, I don't think. And so, yeah, we need people who do this full time at the top, but I think we need people at the grassroots level who bring in that expertise from, what they do otherwise, and you can start to infuse that into sport.
Yeah, I mean, I'll jump in. I mean, 100%. I think that's spot on. I mean, there's other ways to get involved and to help with spread awareness about human rights. That probably doesn't involve any more than like 3 minutes of your time every day. Some of that is just posting on social media. Because I think one of the greatest tools for calling attention to human rights abuses is social media. Twitter has played a huge role in the Arab Spring, for example. Twitter and other forms of social media in spreading the word about what was going on in real time. And so taking the time to read the news, to share articles, you have to be somewhat careful with what you're sharing because, I think there's a lot of misinformation out there as well. But and just posting, once or twice or every now and then, and if you build a platform, I think you can become a really useful tool for just spreading awareness about different human rights issues. And it takes, 3 to 5 minutes a day if you're reading an article and you say, hey, let me share this with my followers or the people who follow me. You can also, do things like put together, panels just like the one that we're on today. Create dialogue around issues of human rights. It's also a way, of career promotion as well and promoting yourself. So there's a benefit, there's a selfish benefit to that as well. But you can write articles, you can conduct research and become an academic on issues of human right and sport. You can provide pro bono legal support. So I know a number of law schools now are creating sports specific clinics. And so you can talk to your clinic lead and see if there's a way to use the clinics at your school to take on safeguarding cases or take on other cases that have a human rights aspect to it. And then also just generally just volunteer with sports organizations. Soccer Without Borders, for example, is a organization that operates in the Bay Area. There are a number of other sports organizations that are focused on giving back to communities, on promoting certain aspects of human rights, and just get involved. If you're at a firm, you can, get your firm involved and see if you can raise money for some of these organizations. And I think also just, you'll meet a lot of great people along the way. So there's a benefit to doing that, not only for the human rights piece of it, but just also for networking and meeting folks in the community.
Yeah, you guys have great answers, and I feel like you're much more informed on this topic of how you can get involved than I am. To me, the biggest thing has definitely been social media. I think that that's the easiest way of spreading awareness, like Kate said. But I also feel like these are conversations that I'm having, constantly all the time with my colleagues. And a lot of it is people are really big sports fans and they don't really like paying attention to the political side of sports. And so it, A, doesn't get as much press, but B, they just don't really comprehend it in the same way as they do like the result of the Chiefs game this weekend. And so to me, just being able to incorporate those kind of conversations into my everyday life and speaking to people about it who might be less informed or less involved in that sort of area of law has been really instrumental. And I think just informing people of what's going on in sports. And I also feel like generally the sports world has historically been comprised of just a lot of white men, and that's slowly changing. But to me, I kind of look at everything that I do in sports as how can I bring a human rights lens to the table where other people might be overlooking that. And I think, it's not intentional, it's not malicious, it's just something that kind of happens in this industry. And having more people who are aware of these issues and bringing them to the table where others might not be is really important.
Although I will
Awesome.
caution, because I love Ashlyn's advice, I will caution really briefly, if you start talking about all the other things around sports with people, sometimes they may not want to listen. There's a reason no one watches the Olympics with me anymore.
Awesome. Thank you all for such amazing answers and just providing your insight. Greatly appreciated. I just want to open up the floor now to see if anyone has any questions for anyone. All right.
I have a question.
All right.
Can you guys hear me all right? Okay.
Yes.
Perfect. my question was like you mentioned how social media is just like a big power that we can use to, make our voices heard. I guess how do we balance that in a world, I guess, where law specifically in the profession sometimes isn't as susceptible to social media and I guess some firms are like maybe against social media and the way that it's, you know, growing. So some people are just have their own opinions on it. So I guess what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, so I started my career in big law and spent 11 years in big law before I moved to a smaller firm in Texas. The and I was posting on social media the entire time. You have to be, I mean, I think you take the rule, the same approach that you do when you're writing an article, for example. You want to be as neutral and fact specific as possible. So if I'm sharing an article, I try not to be too pointed or you know too opinionated on a certain topic. It's hey, look, this very interesting article I came across discussing human rights issues in whatever country or whatever area or whatever topic. So I mean, you need to make sure that you're not overly zealous in how you present what you're sharing. So that's why I like sharing articles. It seems like a low risk, particularly as you're starting off your career. It's a low risk way to bring attention to certain issues without stepping over a line. Because there is a line that you need to walk, and especially with big law, and you need to be careful. I think also just understanding, if you are working in a law firm, understanding who your clients are. It's a tough one, but I think you have to understand that your employer is going to not want you to take positions on social media that are going to be directly adverse to clients. And so that's something that you need to be aware of, and it's a tough pill sometimes to swallow. But you need to be kind of aware of that as well. And so maybe you don't share an article that would be critical to one of your clients or critical to a position your client is taking on a certain issue. And you can share another article on a different topic. So I think that's part of it. You need to be aware of who your employer is or who your target employer is. Be fact specific as possible and leave out too many of your own personal opinions. And at the end of the day, I think people appreciate sharing of information more than sharing of opinions. And so that's also a way to be effective. So I think those are the kind of my two caveats, but I agree it is a concern. And I think it's a concern in all areas of life, not necessarily just in the law. There are repercussions for people for speaking in any industry, and so you have to be careful with sharing information and sharing opinions.
All right, so it looks like we have a hand raised and a message in the chat. Let's see. All right, so the question from the chat is, what do you think about the NCAA cutting roster spots?
It's like, that I had like an hour-long meeting on this today. That question could be its own symposium, honestly. I think it's a reflection of this growing issue in college sports of football outpacing all of the other sports and becoming the model of college sports is not built for Title IX and the way that sports are operating now and the commercial type of industry that it is. So, this is just another step that the NCAA is taking and, through this House v. NCAA settlement that is really, really harmful to Olympic sports. It follows the conference realignment where, football was really the driver there. And now we have soccer players at Stanford traveling across the country for a Tuesday game and they're missing all of their classes. And it also kind of destroyed the Pac-12, which has historically been the conference of Olympic sports. So this is another kind of step in that direction. You're seeing, I think the SEC has already proposed even stricter roster limits than what would be the NCAA's roster limits under the House v. NCAA settlement. And it's this thing where Title IX is not really congruent with the way that sports operate today, where football is taking so many of those scholarships and opportunities for men's sports, and there's not really a great way to balance it out. I would say that the number one way for the NCAA and schools and conferences to handle this would be to give more scholarships and opportunities to female athletes instead of cutting and taking sports away from male athletes. But yeah, we could go on about this forever.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ashlyn. Sorry, I just saw a tweet about it, so I was interested in hearing your views.
Yeah.
Do you think just a follow-up question, do you think Title IX is in jeopardy, like overall?
I don't think that it's entirely in jeopardy, but it is in some ways becoming obsolete. And I think the courts are also gradually cutting away at it, and the DOE has been changing regulations in ways that are just, I don't know, changing the way that Title IX operates pretty significantly. It has in many, many respects done its job. Like where women's sports are now, as opposed to the 1970s, is really shocking. And it's hard to think today of a world where women cannot play sports, and that's where Title IX started. So it has been instrumental in creating those opportunities for female athletes. But I wouldn't be surprised if it needs to change and evolve as sports, and specifically college sports, are changing pretty enormously.
All right. So I think that is all the time that we have this evening for this portion of the symposium. So again, thank you, Ashlyn, Kate, and Ryan, for taking your time and speaking with us today. We're just going to be taking a quick 5-minute break before CJ and his panel come to speak with us about relationship building in sports. So we'll be back in about 5 minutes. And again, thank you all so much for joining us.
All right, everybody, I've been given the green light to go ahead. So I'm going to go ahead and commence the second panel of our symposium. It is an honor and a privilege to have the 4 panelists that I have here today. I have Andrew Brandt, Stephen Drainoff, Tanner Natzke, and Cliff Stein, who have been so gracious to give us an hour of their time tonight. And just a little inside baseball, when I volunteered to do one of the symposium panels for this fall, I knew I wanted to do something on soft skills, like the networking and the relationship building aspect, because there's so many great topics in law school that every law school around the country prepares a lot of students really well for. But I felt like with networking, there's something that just like the really, really great professionals seem to understand. And I feel like it's a skill that can be taught, but is not always necessarily taught. And so I wanted to take some time to, provide that opportunity. And I listed out maybe 20 people that I was thinking about asking, and I didn't even get through to person 5 or 6 on my list, because these 4 people were gracious enough to give me their time and say, whenever it is, just let me know and I'll block it out in my calendar. And so for that, I'm incredibly grateful. So to start off, we have Andrew Brandt. Andrew Brandt is professor of practice and executive director of the Morad Center for the Study of Sports Law at Villanova Law, one of the premier programs for sports legal and business education in the country. He is also an adjunct professor for a week in January at the University of Miami, where he teaches a class on the business of sports that I was lucky enough to get to take last year, and I'm grateful to get to be a TA for this year. Andrew, that was not in the bio you sent me, but I had to just slide a sentence in for the home team. After going to Stanford for undergrad and Georgetown University for law school, Andrew started working with ProServe Inc., where he represented top athletes such as Michael Jordan and Patrick Ewing. From there, he was the general manager of the Barcelona Dragons in the NFL World League. After the World League was suspended by the NFL, he went back to the agent space in football, representing big names like Ricky Williams, Adam Vinatieri, and Matt Hasselbeck. Andrew once again left the agent side to be the vice president of the Packers from 1999 to 2008, where he negotiated all player contracts and handled football business operations, including perhaps the most notable decision in his tenure to draft Aaron Rodgers while Brett Favre was still very much so healthy and on the roster and cemented as an all-time Packers legend, a move which certainly worked out in the long run. Andrew has since become a trusted advisor and asset to the Villanova Athletics Department by serving on the university's professional sports counseling panel and on the university's strategic planning committee for the athletics department. On the media side, Andrew is a featured weekly columnist for both SI and The Athletic, while simultaneously hosting a weekly podcast that averages over 20,000 listeners called The Business of Sports with Andrew Brandt that I highly recommend everyone check out after they subscribe and listen to Conduct Detrimental. I would also recommend checking out Andrew's podcast. If you don't already follow Andrew on Twitter, what are you doing? You can follow him after this panel, join the over 220,000 people that follow him as he frequently tweets his perspective about the business of sports. So that's Andrew. Next up, we have Steven Drainoff. Steven Drainoff is currently the department coordinator at Athletes First Coaches and Executives, a sports agency representing professional as well as collegiate football coaches, executives, and administrators. Steven graduated from Villanova's JD MBA program in 2021. His first job out of law school was at NFL Films as a business affairs coordinator. He later took on multiple roles at the 33rd team, and he has been with Athletes First for almost 2 years now. While in law school, Steven interned with the NFL Management Council and was a fellow for the Morad Center for Sports at Villanova. Before that, Steven attended undergrad at Muhlenberg College, where he played football and studied finance and math. Next up, we have Tanner 𝗦𝗫𝗁𝗫𝗁. Tanner 𝗦𝗫𝗁𝗫𝗁 is currently a premium account executive for the Phoenix Suns, where he went from his first job after college graduation just a few years ago, being a sales development member with the Miami Dolphins in June of 2021. And in a couple short years, he is now with the Phoenix Suns, where he became account executive for the two most valuable areas in the Suns arena by June of 2023, where he regularly gets to spend his time on quickly but authentically building relationships with other top members of the sports industry. Tanner also created and hosts his own podcast, Attitude, Effort, Results, where he's focused on collaborating with leaders in the sports industry to try and educate prospective sports industry professionals, which everyone should also subscribe to and give 5 stars to after subscribing to Conduct Detrimental and the Business of Sports, and then rating those 5 stars. And then lastly, Tanner graduated from the University of Iowa in the spring of 2021, where he studied sport and recreation management. Last alphabetically, but certainly not last in our hearts, is Cliff Stein. Cliff Stein is currently an adjunct professor at Northwestern University School of Law, where he teaches sports law and contract negotiations, as well as recently teaching a course at the University of Miami School of Law about sports negotiations and the player contract. Before that, Cliff spent over 20 years with the Chicago Bears as their senior vice president and general counsel, with job responsibilities that also included being the lead player contract negotiator for the Bears. After getting a BBA in business law in 1991 and a JD in 1994, both from Temple University, Cliff spent a little over 3 years with Tamar, Simonoff, Adorian, and O'Brien as associate counsel, where he started the firm's first sports law practice after becoming certified as an NFLPA contract advisor. He then formed Colton & Stein PC, where he was a founding partner and established a separate business entity, CS Sports, that was concentrated in sports law. In just 5 years of founding CF Sports Law, he acted as legal counsel and an NFLPA certified contract advisor for players in a variety of situations like contract negotiations and endorsement negotiations, but also things like arbitration, appeal, injury grievance, and worker comp claims. During this brief time, he built up relationships with front office executives and coaches in the NFL world, which no doubt helped with him becoming and remaining SVP and GC for the Bears for over 2 decades. So that is the esteemed panel that we have. I'm going to need a sip of water in a moment. So anyways, I would like to start question 1. I want to start with the order of Andrew, Cliff, Steven, Tanner, and then we're going to flip it for the second question, and you'll see why in a sec. So with question 1, I want to start out with students and young professionals just starting out with building out their network or finding mentors. I want to know how each of y'all, because I got a panel of a wide array of experiences, a wide array of job titles. I want to know how each of y'all started and potentially some of the things that you might have been looking for in a potential mentor when you were, at our age as a student.
Well, thanks, CJ, and great to have you in class last year, and thanks for volunteering to be my TA this year when I come down there in January. Great to be with you guys. It's such an honor to be with friends. Stephen, of course, one of my star students when I started this many years ago at Villanova, and great to see Cliff. Wow. We go way back. We have the same background as you talked about, agent, then team side. And Cliff was my friendly colleague at the Bears for so long, and I learned so much from him. It's great to be with everyone here. I guess I'll just talk about the way I got in. Growing up in Washington, D.C., a tennis player, and I always thought, oh my God, where's I kind of like sports. I understand sports. I was one of these nerdy kids that kind of felt like questions about sports different than other kids. Other kids are like, who's the best player? What's the stats? Who's scoring the most points? I was like, why is that team always good? Why is that team always bad? I was one of those kids. Like, maybe there's some world out there I could actually work in this, but I didn't know. And we're talking about a much different time where I couldn't even take sports law at Georgetown University Law School. There was none. I had to go across the city to Catholic University to take sports law. So that shows you how much things have changed. What was lucky for me is that a firm in DC down the street, it's no longer there. It's called ProServe. They actually represented athletes, but represented tennis players, and they also ran tennis events such as the annual event for at that time the ATP Tour that played in DC. And little Andrew Brandt was a ball boy from age 5 years old. And I was kind of aware of those guys, and they were of me. So I basically walked in first year of law school and said, hey, I'm a tennis player. You know me. You guys represent tennis players. Just let me do stuff. And they were like, okay. And that just kind of started the ball rolling, where a couple years later, I looked down the hall. There's a guy named David Falk who's representing Mike Jordan and Pat Ewing and all these great guys. And I said, do you need help? He's like, yeah. I said, I'll help. So I guess the answer, the little advice for everyone listening is just raise your hand. You just never know. You never know where you could be needed and where you can help. And if you have to fake it to make it. And that goes into later life too. When I'm at ESPN, a producer calls one day and says, can you talk about NASCAR? I'm like, sure. I had no idea what NASCAR. I didn't know anything about NASCAR. But you work at it, you learn it, and you fake your way until you feel some confidence. I guess I'm going to pass it on to Steve, but I guess the thing I'll leave it with is there are so many ways to get into sports that, again, were not available when I was your age. It used to be, okay, you work for a team or you work for a player as an agent side. Now it's just, as Steve will talk about agents for coaches, there's getting into it through the union threads, the league side, through the media side, through the labor side, obviously law firms, different areas of law, and the exploding nature of two areas, analytics, sports betting, and then, of course, college sports. So I just think there's a fascinating world out there that's so different than it used to be, with more opportunity. And find that person or firm or persons that's kind of doing what you want to do. Be specific, be submissive. I'll do anything, because people just want their desk cleared, mainly. So I'll just start there and leave that, and we'll come back to more. So I'll pass it on to Steve.
Yeah, I'll jump in, CJ. I'm not sure if this was the order that you wanted, but I'll jump in now. So I'm one of the younger panelists here for sure. I'm just 3.5 years out of law school now. When I was choosing law schools, I was looking for the schools, one, that were close to where I grew up. I grew up in New Jersey, but also looking for schools that had sports law programs and schools that had people who worked there who I might see a similar career path as me. And similar to Professor Brandt, I still call him Professor Brandt. It'll never change. But similar to Professor Brandt, I really wanted to work in the business of sports. Realized I was never going to play in the NFL, but I can carve out a career for myself with a finance background and a law degree, and I can try to become a salary cap expert or an agent and pursue that career path. So as I was looking at law schools, I saw Professor Brandt was the executive director of the program, and knew his background was in that field in salary cap. So that was my first step in kind of looking for mentors, was finding somebody with that same career path that I wanted to emulate. During internships, similarly, I sought out people that I thought had jobs that frankly I thought were great and really cool and things that I would want to do with my career. So when I worked at the management council, I worked specifically with the legal department, the labor law department of the league. And, there's a few lawyers there who I still keep in touch with to this day. A few people who I didn't work with, hands-on, because I was in the legal department And there's a whole other department of labor operations and player finance that I sought out and wanted to have a conversation with them and still keep in touch with to this day as well. So, that's a big thing. And Professor Brandt touched on it, but finding people who have a similar career to what you want to pursue and a similar career path and kind of trying to emulate that, along with my internship at the league at the NFL, I went on to work at the 33rd team, which is a company run by Mike Tannenbaum, who was an NFL general manager and had salary cap background. At the 33rd team, I met an individual named 𝗥𝗶𝗴𝗵𝘁𝘀, who worked for the Falcons in salary cap for a number of years, 18 years, I believe, at the Falcons. So, finding those people, seeking them out, and ultimately, 𝗥𝗶𝗴𝗵𝘁𝘀, who I just mentioned, is somebody who helped me get my foot in the door here at Athletes First. And then now I have a whole group of people here at Athletes First who I now consider mentors. So, this is a long-winded way of saying find people that you really want to emulate their career, and don't be afraid to just reach out, ask for a conversation, and from there, you never know what's going to happen.
CJ, you want me to go next?
Yeah, you have the floor. They've pinned you, so you're good.
Appreciate you having me. Good to see everybody. Andrew, after all these years, and Steve, I got a chance to talk to you recently, which is great. Tanner, nice to meet you. I love the name. A lot of memories come back when I see conduct detrimental. I don't know how you guys came about it, but like Andrew knows, every letter we sent to a player that had the word conduct detrimental meant this was the worst possible thing they could have done. So very impactful. Don't know how it relates to all this. I think it's awesome. Yeah, I mean, look, building relationships. Like I would say, like I look back and I say, how did I get here? Who helped me get here? Like how am I here 30 years later? Because I don't know that I was so strategic when I was in your shoes. I wasn't doing the things that you are doing right now, which is awesome. I mean, you are creating, network warriors here by really being strategic and talking about it. I did know, one thing I did know to do is wherever I worked, or when I was in school, I was always able to find that one person I worked with, or even a professor that showed an interest in me, was willing to invest time in me to develop me as a person and cared. And I always kind of tried to stay close to those people. And those were the kind of people that always helped me. I can tell a story how really trying to find mentors and networking early in my career, meeting even Andrew Brandt, may have led to me having a 22-year career with the Bears. He probably doesn't even realize this. When I was a young agent, I went to Temple University undergraduate and law school, and I was trying to scrape and get whatever players I could, and they had a quarterback, a young skinny quarterback who came from Spiro, Oklahoma, a town of 2,000 people, but he broke all the records at Temple as a quarterback, so I was able to get him. I wasn't even his first choice as an agent. I was his second choice. When he didn't get drafted, he called me, and I was 1 or 2 years out of law school, and he asked me if I would still be willing to be his agent. And he went to the Canadian Football League for 2 years. He became the best player up there. I had 17 teams that wanted to sign him. The Bears were not one of them, and the Packers were one of them. And I was able, prior to that time, to build a relationship with Andrew. He was one person that I always felt did show interest in me, did return my calls. Whether he did that with everyone or not, I don't know. But I felt like that was someone I could call for questions. And maybe or maybe not, that helped with when we ultimately had to choose a team that this player had to sign with. And Andrew was good enough to give this player a $25,000 signing bonus. He had educated me that the undrafted rookie rules applied to him, so that there was only a limit of how much money they could give to a player like this, even though I had 17 teams. He had Brett Favre there. We wanted Henry Burris to be what Aaron Rodgers was, to be the next great quarterback, but he wasn't. And they put him on the practice squad. And while I was on the practice squad in 2001, and I would work hard to build relationships with scouts and coaches and general managers. And because he was on the Green Bay Packers practice squad, that got the attention of the Chicago Bears. And so during the season, they were calling me a lot to see if they could take Henry Burris off of the Green Bay Packers practice squad. And that was legal. That was not tampering because he was on the practice squad. And they did end up doing that. And so the last player I signed to a team was Henry Burris. And then they signed me to be what ended up being a long career there. So networking with Andrew had something to do with me having 22 years of a career in the NFL. But I would say that, you know, keeping those people in your life was so important. Once you identify who they are, I know a lot of you do a good job of calling everyone, but figure out who are those people that are going to be in a position to help you, not because of their position of power, but because they've shown an interest in you, and ask them if you can do things for them. How can you help them in any way? And then keep them in your life and stay in contact with them. And I agree with everything that Steve and Andrew said about reverse engineering the bios of the people you want. You don't have to go right into sports. You know, most of us didn't. A lot of us didn't. And you look at the bios of people you want to emulate, they didn't. If you're lawyers, if you're in law school, it's always good to get real life experience. So don't think that the first thing you have to do out of law school to get a job long time in sports is to work in sports, because I didn't. And that law firm that I worked for 3 years, they were a union side labor law firm, and I was an associate that did prepaid legal services, meaning that we represented hundreds of unions. And if they needed legal services that they were either paid for free or discounted, they would call the firm, and I would be the one on the other end of the phone. And I did real estate matters and wills and collection letters and municipal court representation. And I got a good broad base of legal experience that actually helped me greatly in my job as general counsel with the Chicago Bears.
All right. My piece of advice for you guys is to get uncomfortable. And I say that because right now, intellectually, I am the least educated person on this entire call. And so I say that because getting outside of your comfort zone allows you to create avenues, allows you to be in rooms with people that you might not necessarily know you belong in. And so even today, like after today's call, talking about building relationships, building connections, I will be reaching out to the 3 panelists here to build a further relationship right with. So for my piece of advice, like get outside of your comfort zone. I am a small town dairy farmer, 6th generation dairy farmer from Green Bay, Wisconsin. And I'm on a panel right now for Miami law. And everybody here is intellectually smarter than me. So I say that because the more and more you get outside of your comfort zone, the reason I'm here is actually helping Sam Bly get a job in Miami with the Dolphins. And then obviously she goes out to CJ and gets me here. But getting outside of your comfort zone and into rooms that maybe you don't necessarily even belong in at the time is so important. Because the worst thing that somebody can say, if I were to reach out to Andrew right now and be like, hey, Andrew, got you on the panel today. It was awesome listening to you. We'd love to get on a phone call, get together, informational interview, 15, 20 minutes, learn about your career. The worst thing that Andrew can say to me is no. And then I'm right back to where I started. Because before I reached out to him, I still had not connected with him prior. So get outside of your comfort zone, stretch the limits a little bit. And I personally believe that will take you to heights that you didn't even know were there at the time.
Sweet, thank you. I mean, I do want to commend all y'all for that very in-depth answer to the first one, because it actually answered the first half of the question I had for part 2. So we can just move right along past that one. I do want to kind of stop down a little bit on something Cliff said when you spoke a little bit on essentially finding the right connections and then following up with them. And something I wanted to kind of stop down on, because like my own personal experience, like there are 1Ls on this call right now. Like there's only so many hours in the day, especially in your first year of law school, second year. 3L, it's maybe a little bit more time, but generally speaking, there's not a lot of hours in the day. So how do you essentially decipher finding out who are the people worth reaching out? I know you touched on it a little bit, Cliff, but if everybody could kind of give their perspective on, based on who y'all's strongest connections are that, you have leaned on, what specifically did they do? And with the benefit of hindsight, was there anything that you should have been able to see like immediately, like, oh, this person was going to be very helpful because of this thing that they did rather than, or this trait they had rather than like what the result was, if that makes sense.
I can take that one right away. I think I have a unique perspective on it. My perspective is know where you want to go because everybody on this call has somewhere different that they want to go for different reasons. So if you know where you want to go and you know why you want to be there, that makes the process a little bit easier. If my goal in life is to be a CEO of a company, I now want to go look at a CEO and I want to find out what person they are. I want to find out what person makes a CEO. Almost look from a third party of what type of individual would be a CEO of this company. What type of person would be the general counsel for the Chicago Bears, right? After I find out that, there might be a large gap. There's a large gap between where Cliff's at right now and where some of the individuals in this call are. That has nothing to do with intellectual. That's just time. So if I know that I want to be where Cliff is one day, now I work backwards. What's the person right in front of Cliff doing for a job? What type of person is there? And keep working backwards until I find the person that is my next step. As soon as I find the person that is my next step, now I attack. Now I build a relationship with them. Now I cultivate it with them. I'm going out to lunches. I'm annoying them to get lunch with them, right? I'm learning what they're doing on a daily basis. And then as soon as I make the first step, now I go to step two. And so instead of trying to fill this massive gap where, hey, I want to go from year one of law school to 20 years of general counsel with the Bears, that seems like a massive gap, right? Let's shrink that gap. Take step one as soon as we're done with one. Now go find the next person to build that relationship with.
I'll echo that with what Tanner was saying and add to it that sometimes it is easier, especially as a younger person, like most on here are law students. It's easier to reach out to people who are maybe on that first rung of the ladder. And I think Tanner hit the nail on the head there. It's not only are you trying to kind of build your way up and work your way up the ladder just to know what you should be like or what skills you need in a certain role, but also, if you're reaching out to the general manager of the Bears or of the Packers, they're probably not answering a cold email from a law student at University of Miami or at Villanova. But the entry level, or maybe not entry level, but the number 3 salary cap person may, or the associate general counsel may. So that's another way of kind of networking your way into at least into an organization that you may be interested in, and then they may have a connection that they'd be willing to connect you with somebody who is the number one or the number one at an agency, because there's no one way to skin a cat. So you never know where the connections are going to take you as well. When I was at the 33rd team, we had a lot of kind of like-minded individuals like myself who were entry level, interns basically, and we developed a really good relationship, and now a bunch of us are, working at agencies and teams across the league and even colleges as directors of player personnel. And, one of my good friends is, who I met at the 33rd team is now the director of player personnel for Georgia. And, we talk business now and, we're able to help each other out. So that's just one thing, while you're in law school, talk with your buddies in law school, talk with your buddies at other schools, and, don't be afraid to reach out to people who may not be in the legal field as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think Cliff and I are coming at it a little little more gray haired than most of the people here. I get a lot of incoming, and yeah, I think it's hard to get back to people. It's hard to sort of, like we're all lawyers and conduct detrimental and precedent. I kind of have a precedent that if I respond to one and have a conversation with one, or one person wants to shadow me or whatever, I can't do that because then it's just the line at the door with so many incoming. And that's why I stay off LinkedIn, because everybody wants the same thing. But I think what gets the attention of people like us maybe is just a deeper understanding. Like, don't just say I love sports, like to, talk to you for 10 minutes. Like what is your secret sauce? Like what is something that separates you from all these other people trying to get time with me or anyone else? And do your homework. Don't just say I want to get into salary cap. Like what about it? What have you done with salary cap? Have you blogged about it? Have you podcasted about it? Have you done a deeper dive than everyone in your position? Those are some obvious things. And then, you know, research on the person. Like I've gotten people that said, yeah, I know you're a runner. I know you do triathlons. Like I just did one and I'm like, oh, cool. Okay. Um, or they know I play piano. Like someone will say, I do a lot of jazz and I play in this method. I'm like, oh, okay. That might be interesting to talk to. Um, so again, you got to figure out a way, not that I'm anything special, but if you're trying to get to people that have a lot of incoming, you got to somehow stand out. I'll let Cliff give his input.
Yeah, I totally agree with everything they said, CJ. So, and I was thinking the same thing, like, have something like that's going to really connect you. There are so many incoming, like Andrew said, so you can't, you feel bad, you see a great resume, you've put yourself in their shoes, but there's not enough time in the day to talk to everybody. So be sensitive to that. I always tried my best to respond to the people that maybe, like Andrew said, hey, I I want you to introduce you to CJ. I find you really interesting. Or Steve might say, hey, I want you to meet Tanner. You might find him really interesting. So that I knew that they would do that for me. So I would do that for them. Now I'm not saying that's the only way to do it, but like if CJ, if you contacted me and said, hey, I went to Temple Law School, or I grew up in Northeast Philadelphia. So the things that Andrew said, having those common touch points, and that might actually help narrow your search, because in terms of who should I contact, maybe like my son, like he goes to law school at UCJ, and he found out that someone that went to Michigan, a lawyer, was a little more responsive than some others, and I said that should be how you tailor your search. So just, like think about like how, if put yourself in their shoes, put yourself 20 years from now and put yourself in their shoes, what would get you to respond? And it's not that we don't want to. And I use the acronym, sometimes you gotta, it's an NPPIA. You gotta be a nice, persistent pain in the ass. You gotta be respectful, but you can't just, like sometimes I needed 10 emails from you, or not you specifically, but the student to respond. It wasn't that I didn't want to. Sometimes I meant to, or we had initial contact and it fell through the cracks because we get so busy. So doing that respectfully, tailoring your search to something that you can have in common with them, like Andrew said, and who are and then like exactly like Tanner said, like what do you want to be, and be strategic about it. Be strategic on how you create your list. Like you're gonna ask a question, or you might or not, but like, what would you tell yourself? And I would tell myself, like, I have to be strategic. Like I have to really be conscious about this and how I create my list of the people that are going to help me get to where I want to go.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's great advice. That was something that was definitely a tone shift for me, which we're gonna talk in a minute about mistakes. But that for me, like my spring of 1L, I pulled up every NFL team's website and just reached out to anybody. And then since then I realized like, oh wait, SI.com and ESPN.com out articles of like these executives are in line to be the next, like to get promoted. And it's like, oh, I could just reach out to them before. Like I could be so much more strategic about who I'm reaching out to. So I definitely think that that's great advice. But I do want to know from y'all, what are some of these mistakes or these areas where people are not necessarily being as strategic, where you feel like, maybe to save some people from making these mistakes, to save them some time, what are the issues you're seeing as people try to build these relationships, sometimes from basically the ground up? And I ask that to anyone.
I can go on that one. So I help with interviewing people for premium roles with the Phoenix Suns. And also with the podcast, I've helped 12 individuals get jobs in the sports industry, and I'm constantly helping with the interview process. So the interview process is really like you are starting the interview process when you reach out to somebody. That's interview number one. By the time you get to an interview process, if you've done your work diligently, and it might be different in the law background again, because there's like real things you have to be good at. If you're in sales, you just have to talk to people. So like that's it. In law, you might have some other qualifications, but by that time, you should have a good relationship with that person. And so when reaching out, there's two things that really are big. Like, hey, Tanner, I'd love to connect. I'm looking for a job with the Suns. I don't know who you are, respectfully, right? So if I build a relationship with you, now I'll put my reputation on the line if you have what it takes. If you reach out and say, hey, I'm looking for a job with the Suns, like, can you refer me to somebody? Every time that we do that or I do that, I'm also putting my reputation on the line. I'm putting my brand on the line. I'm putting my career on the line. So reaching out and saying, hey, I'm looking for a job. Can you help me out? That is a pretty big negative from what I've seen in the past. And the second is, hey, I want to get my foot in the door. I'd love to be a lawyer, but I'd like to start in sales first. Or, hey, I'm looking to get into marketing, but I want to start in sales. Or, hey, I'm looking to do this, but I'm just looking to get my foot in the door. Anything possible. While that might be true, articulating the verbiage correctly is very important. Because if you think about it from a management standpoint, if you come to me, CJ, and you said, hey, I'm looking for a job in the industry, I just want to get my foot in the door. I know you're hiring for marketing, but I really want to get into social media. As a manager, why would I spend my time? Why would I spend my value building you, onboarding you, pouring my time and soul into you if all you want to do is leave? So I think articulating in a framework of, hey, I would love to be great at what I'm doing right now. If my career takes off on this path, awesome. If down the road it shifts and now we take off this path, I'm good with that too, but I'm going to be exactly where my feet are and I'm going to build right here, right now. It just thinking about it from a manager's perspective and the time and value they're putting into you, back to what Cliff and Andrew said, time is valuable. And so if you get that time, make sure you're articulating it correctly, so that they value the time as well.
I had a couple things, CJ, too. Like the one Tanner said, I wrote three things down. One was asking for a job. Okay, he covered that. Number two, not following up. So not being the nice persistent pain in the ass. I sent them an email. They never responded. No. Follow up. And then number three really is not being prepared. Like have an agenda. When don't call Andrew and Tanner and Steven and expect them to fill the space with talking. Have an agenda of what you're going to talk to, and that will get their attention. Like I have a student at Northwestern Law School, and she wrote an article about general counsels on different teams, and she used that as an opportunity. I thought it was brilliant. I read it. I learned something from it. But she used that as an opportunity to make networks, make relationships. But my point is she was prepared, she had an agenda, and she killed two birds with one stone.
Yeah, I mean, I'll echo that. I mean, I think what impresses people the most is, self-motivation, self-starter, doing things without being asked. And, when I want to go to bat for someone, Tanner said something really, really important that I've been, building my brand for 30 something years as Cliff has. So if we're going to put our brand out there for someone, it better be worth it. It better be worth it. And when a guy like Steve Drainoff proves himself to me in law school the way he did over and over again, yeah, I'm going to put that brand out there to help him. And what I tell my students is, if over the years that I've been working with you, you make an impression, and if you see a job you really want, I'll put my brand out there for you. And that carries some weight. So, and I don't, I want them to do the work. Like, don't just say I applied to this job through Teamworks or something. I said, no, who's the contact and what do you want me to say? And the way you make it easier for them, easier for the person, like you want to go to someone and put yourself out there, you better be prepared because you don't get these shots very often. You really don't. Someone who's been in the business a long time and you're going to ask a favor, you're only going to get about one, So make it count. Like if you're a second-year law student, you see someone, you may want to save that till you're a third-year law student. You got to understand all the things we're talking about with incoming and who you're going to help and when. These are big asks for people. So, cold call is going to be tough, but if you can connect some way, CJ went to SMU. I got my attention. My son's at SMU. Okay. Whatever it takes, right? And then CJ turned out to be a good student, and CJ out of the blue says, "Can I TA for you?" Not asking for anything in return. That makes a difference. And I'll say something obvious, which you all know by now, which is never tell someone, your qualification besides a good resume is, I love sports. Who cares? We all love sports. That's a given. I mean, we don't care about loving sports. What can you do that's different than all the other people that are applying or asking the same question? What sets you apart? And figure that out.
And I'll just add and kind of summarize everything because I think everything has been covered. But saving your bullets, because even if you have a great connection with somebody, unless they're your uncle or your father, they're only going to give you so many chances and so many recommendations. So saving your bullets to make sure that you're not oversaturating one person, because eventually they'll get sick of you and you'll end up kind of wearing on them a little bit, and then just providing value. So, like Cliff was mentioning, his student who had an article written that was, ready to go and, something, one, just a discussion point, and two, it could have provided some value to the general counsels that she was talking with. And, on the other hand, if you're, wanting to work in more on the sales side, like with Tanner, having some sort of a sales strategy or having, just an idea on what he does and how you can make his job easier and how you can, help him succeed better. That's, the two things that I've found have helped me the most. And, on the opposite side, when I was first starting out with trying to network in this field, just those cold calls saying I'm interested in sports are never going to land. You need to have something else that sets you apart.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thanks, y'all. I did want to open the floor up to questions, but before I did that, I did want to ask sort of like two, maybe three, like sort of rapid fire, like 30 seconds or less questions. So first of all, what, in the event that you're somebody that like likes a quote or like words to live by, what's one single like sentence about networking that somebody might have given you when you were just starting out that you've kind of kept with you? I know that the acronym Cliff gave is a great one. I've already written that down personally. So that's one question. If you could go back and tell your younger self something, what would you try to tell them? And then if there's only one thing that somebody could take away from this, I know, Andrew, you've already mentioned, like, don't just say I love sports like we all do. So if y'all could each choose to answer any combination of those three questions.
One thing that I think, especially in networking, is really important is to not get discouraged. There's an old proverb about bamboo, and it takes years and years to grow, and you just have to keep watering it, and then eventually it's going to shoot up. And that's kind of how networking is. You need to be persistent. You need to be okay with failure, and you need to be okay putting yourself out there. And like Tanner mentioned at the very beginning, just being uncomfortable. You need to get comfortable doing that and being okay with failure, especially because honestly, you're gonna be probably failing in your cold outreaches more than you're going to be succeeding, even if you're doing all the right things and, doing it the way that we're all talking about.
My quote would be, you are under no obligation to be the person you were 5 minutes ago. No obligation. You get to decide the next path. You get to decide the next email. You get to decide the next phone call you make. You are under no obligation to be the person you were 5 minutes ago.
Yeah, I think along those lines, I had an RA in my freshman dorm at Stanford that said something that always stuck with me. He says, allow in your life for serendipity. And not enough people do that, especially young people. Life is not linear. It is the kids that were in 11th grade and had their life mapped out, they're at the saloon. They're not. So it's look at me. Did I ever think I'd live in Green Bay, Wisconsin, or Barcelona, Spain, or work at ESPN? Or no, just never do. You just think about, I'm a skinny little kid from Washington, D.C. I don't know. You just allow for things to happen, put yourself in position to be there, and then say yes. Say yes. I had to look Green Bay up on a map. I'd never been there, but I'm like, okay, sure, I'll do it. And I think if you can go through life with that attitude, you'll surprise yourself.
Yeah, this isn't a quote, CJ, but like, if there was one thing I would tell myself, or that you could all take away from this, is really what is a network warrior? How would I define that? And that's someone who understands what advocates and champions are. Okay, you have a lot of friends and colleagues that you know may or may not help you. They're not necessarily advocates and champions, but an advocate and champion in your life is someone that wants to see you do well, does not compete with you, is willing to put their brand on you. Andrew is an advocate and champion for Stephen. That is clear here. And everything you guys do, and ladies, everything you do from law school to life is an opportunity to build your network of advocates and champions. And if your foot is in the door at a law firm, an organization, a sports team, an agency, everyone you meet is a potential advocate and champion. It's not just the leaders. It might be a secretary. It might be the security person. It might be the receptionist. Because when you make an impression on them, they're running around talking about the great impression that you met with them. If Steve Dranoff worked as an intern at the management council, and he walked in every day and he talked to the receptionist and he figured out her story and how she got there, because everyone has an interesting story, and he invested time in showing interest in them. Unintentionally, Steve Dranoff just built an advocate and champion. And I bring that up because all of us, the jobs that we have, the job that Andrew had all those years, and Steve and myself, we got it because that one person that helped us, they were one of our advocates and champions. You can't do it yourself. Andrew said it earlier. You're not going to get anywhere by you talking about yourself. Someone else has to do it for you. Even if you do a good job of an interview, they're still going to talk to other people, especially in sports. They want to hear it from someone else. So the more you're deliberate at creating that tier one, the highest level of your network is the champions and advocates, and everyone else, hopefully maybe you can make them that. And that might be by doing things for them. That might be by investing in them, showing care in them. And they're going to want to believe in you. And the more people you can get believe in you, the more they're talking about you, and the more likelihood that you're going to get a job. I think that from this call, from what I've heard, I can help some of these people get a job just from this being on this call. That's huge. That's because you created this forum with advocates and champions. So I love it.
Great. I really appreciate it from everybody. So I did want to open the floor to questions. Feel free to raise your hand or put a question in the chat. If you don't want to speak up or have your name attached to it, you can send it in a private message. I did get one question, more so for Stephen, Cliff, and Andrew. They said, if you don't have that dream first job, how do you keep networking and then eventually make that lateral into the dream job? Everyone loves to help students, but what about the young lawyers?
I can start us off. I started off. When I went to law school, I wanted to work for an NFL team or for an agency. I had a few interviews with teams and agencies. Nothing materialized, but I was able to get my foot in the door by going and working at NFL Films. It was a really good experience. I learned a lot about contract drafting and about just different types of law because it was really an entertainment and a media company more so than sports itself. So, those transferable skills, somebody is going to find useful. And, when I reached out to the 33rd team, they were really interested because I had a little bit of media and entertainment background. And then from there, I had drafting experience. I had experience working with former NFL general managers and coaches, and then, was able to make a jump over to athletes first on the coaches and executive side because I had a little bit of experience in that field. That's all to say, look, working at NFL Films is still a dream job for a lot of people, and going and working at a law firm is probably a little bit more realistic, of a first job out of school. But it just speaks to really having transferable skills. And I think that I might have missed out on something by not going and working for a law firm because I didn't get the day-to-day grind of being a lawyer and drafting, reviewing contracts, doing legal research every single day. So, you're going to gain a lot of transferable skills, even if you're not in the sports field right away. And then it's just a matter of being able to articulate those and networking to meet people who, can help put you in a spot where maybe you could get that dream job or a job that could set you up for your dream job.
Anything else to add, or should I move on to a couple of the questions in chat?
I'll just say I didn't have that dream job. So like, if that means anything, like I was sitting as an associate at a law firm that really almost didn't hire me. Like it was my third year and I didn't have an offer, and one of the associates there said, just keep showing up. And I just kept showing up, and they're like, oh, I guess we'll put them on the payroll. And finally they got an office for me, and I was on a toxic tort case. That was not my dream job, but I got a phone call one day and I saw an opportunity to be an agent. It was not something I was pursuing. I actually took one sports law class in law school. I had no interest in working in sports. I thought I was going to be an environmental law attorney. And when I got that call, the player was a player on the Denver Broncos, and he had played college football with one of my best friends growing up. This also might fall under advice for prospective agents, Josh Gonzalez. And I said, I'm not an agent, I'm a lawyer. And he said he has a legal question for you. And it was a workers' comp issue. And I wasn't a workers' comp lawyer, and I wasn't in the state of Colorado, but he didn't care. He just wanted to talk to a lawyer that he could trust. So I helped him out. And then he asked me, I was only 2 years older than this player. He was a defensive tackle for the Broncos. And he said, will you be my agent? But I met his dad. And his dad had two questions. How old are you and how many clients you have? And I had a bad answer to both questions. So I called my sports law professor, John Langle, and he had been a labor law attorney at Ballard Spahr in Philadelphia, but he was also an agent for coaches and some players. So I said, will you meet with me with this player and will you co-represent him? Goes to your mentors again, people that have helped you. And he said, of course, yeah, sure. And we brought him up to the Center City law firm office. The dad was sold, the player signed with me, and my career as an agent began. And then shortly thereafter, John Langle said, you don't need me involved. But that goes to, you don't necessarily have to have your dream job. If it's what you want to do, keep your eye on the ball, keep making contacts. I am contacted by a lot of people that stay in contact with me that are not in sports, and they've asked me to keep an eye out for them. And these are people that I believe in, and I think they will eventually get in. You can all do that too if you're not in your dream job. No one has their dream job out of law school anyway. It just doesn't happen.
The other thing, which I think a lot of you know, is that sports jobs are not on the calendar of normal jobs. And my own son was working in one job and got a call to start another job, and he had to leave a job he was very happy at, but he really wanted to get to this new job in sports, and he left it. And you may burn bridges. When I was in law school, I did very well at Georgetown Law, so I put on the suit like a lot of you in third year, got the offer in like December to start in September, which is just a totally unrealistic world compared to sports. But I interned at ProServe, and I'm like, maybe they'll offer me, and they offered me like in July. And then I had to decide, do I want to go into sports? And like Steve said, even as a young guy, I'm realizing I'm going to turn away a life in quote unquote law, because being a sports agent, let's be real, is not being a sophisticated lawyer at all. So I made the decision to renege on a firm that I had committed to 6 months ago, burn that bridge, turn down more money, more security, a life that was sort of set up for me at a big law firm, and decide to go into sports. You got to be able to make that commitment. And I understand, I was fortunate, didn't have huge loan amounts like some of you do. But these are tough decisions, because sports does not give you the luxury of law firms in terms of timing, in terms of security, in terms of income. It's very different.
That's a good answer. Yeah. So I did want to ask Ethan's question in the chat. It's a great question. A lot of the reason why I wanted to do this is because there are so many people that are, the law school equivalent of underclassmen, or, 1Ls, that don't necessarily always know what to do. So Ethan's question is, what opportunities should a 1L student look for during this upcoming summer to build on the skills necessary to succeed in this field? And I would like to just also say that Ethan has already sent me a LinkedIn request, so shout out to Ethan for that.
I'm just going to say 4 words, CJ, and then I'm going to do whatever you can.
I think that's all that needs to be said. Any experience is good experience.
Sweet. Well, are there any other questions before we go ahead and wrap this up? All right, I think we are good. Thank y'all, everybody, for coming out. Thank you to the panelists for being so gracious with y'all's time. Really appreciate it. Super, super grateful. My biggest fear, I was more scared that I wasn't going to be able to find people to do this than I was excited about the success of it. So I just wanted to say thank you all for almost immediately all agreeing to do it and assuaging that fear like a month and a half ago. So thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks, CJ.
Happy to do it. Thanks, everyone.
Appreciate you.